I started working the evening shift at a gym I couldn't really afford to be a member of. That's the truth. I only got the job because my friend Ethan quit suddenly and told the manager I was normal enough not to scare customers. Apparently that was the standard. So for 4 nights a week, I sat behind the front desk checking people in, folding towels, wiping down machines nobody ever wiped down themselves, and pretending I knew how to answer fitness questions. Protein shakes worth it? No idea, man. What's better for shoulders? Probably shoulder stuff. I wasn't exactly thriving. The gym itself was one of those newer places with black walls, bright white lighting, overpriced smoothies, and trainers who looked genetically engineered in a lab. Most of them barely acknowledged me beyond a nod when they came in. Except Shane. Shane showed up 2 weeks after I started. New trainer. Mid-20s, maybe a little older than me. Tall, broad shoulders, dark blonde hair that always looked slightly messy no matter how early his shift started. He had tattoos on one arm and this calm, low voice that somehow made everyone listen when he spoke. Even angry customers calmed down around him. The first thing I noticed about Shane wasn't that he was attractive. It was that he paid attention. "Hey, Lucas," he said on his second day working there. I looked up from the computer, surprised. "You know my name? It's on your tag." "Right. Yeah. Forgot about that." That got a smile out of him. Small. Quick. After that, he always stopped at the desk before leaving. "Busy night? You surviving over here? You ever actually seen someone use that stretching area?" Little comments. Tiny conversations. But they became the best part of my shifts embarrassingly fast. The thing about Shane was that he didn't act like a trainer. Not the stereotypical kind, anyway. He wasn't loud or overconfident. Didn't flirt with every person who walked through the door. Half the time he looked exhausted, like he carried too much in his head even while spotting clients. One rainy Thursday night, around closing, I was outside struggling with my bike lock when Shane walked out. "You ride that thing home?" he asked. I glanced down at the ancient bike I'd owned since college. "Unfortunately. It's pouring." I noticed. He looked at the sky, then back at me. "Where do you live?" "About 20 minutes away." "On the bike?" "Yeah." He stared at me for a second like he was deciding something internally. "I'll drive you." I laughed immediately. "You don't have to do that." "I know. I'll survive." "You'll get pneumonia." "That feels dramatic." "Lucas," he said, already pulling his keys out, "get in the car." There was something weirdly difficult to argue with about him. So 5 minutes later, I was sitting in the passenger seat of Shane's truck, trying not to drip rainwater everywhere while he adjusted the heat. "Sorry," I muttered. "For what?" "Existing damply." That made him laugh under his breath. And somehow, that drive became a routine without either of us officially deciding it. After every closing shift we worked together, Shane drove me home. At first, I tried to refuse sometimes. "You seriously don't need to keep doing this. It's on my way." "It absolutely is not." "Close enough." Eventually, I stopped fighting him on it. The drive started stretching longer too. At first, it was 10 minutes. Music low. Small talk. Then suddenly we were sitting parked outside my apartment for another 40 minutes talking about stupid things that somehow turned personal without warning. His childhood in a tiny town 3 hours away. My failed attempt at studying business before realizing I hated every second of it. His habit of stress cleaning at 2 a.m. The fact that I still ate cereal for dinner most nights. "You absolutely look like a cereal for dinner person," he told me once. "What does that even mean?" "It means if I opened your cabinets right now, there'd be like 3 forks and 6 boxes of cereal." "There are 4 forks," I corrected. He looked way too pleased with himself after that. The strange part was how natural it felt. I wasn't used to easy connections. Usually with people, especially guys, I felt like I had to perform some version of myself to keep conversations alive. But Shane made silence feel normal too. Sometimes we'd just sit there after a shift, exhausted, listening to the quiet hum of the heater while rain hit the windshield. And somehow those were the moments I liked most. One night, maybe a month into the rides home, he asked casually, "You seeing anyone?" The question hit me harder than it should have. I kept my eyes on the window. "No. You want to?" I shrugged. "Depends. On? If they'd make my life better or just more complicated." Shane went quiet at that. Then he nodded slowly. "Fair answer." I wanted to ask him the same question back. I didn't. Mostly because I was scared of sounding too interested. But over the next couple weeks, I started noticing things. The way girls flirted with him at the gym, and how politely detached he always seemed. The fact that he never talked about exes. How his expression changed any time conversations drifted toward relationships. Like there was always something he almost said and stopped himself from saying. And maybe I imagined it, but sometimes during those late-night drives, the air between us felt too charged to just be friendship. Like we were both waiting for something neither of us knew how to start. One Friday night, the gym closed early because of a plumbing issue. Nobody was complaining except me because it meant losing hours. "Management acts like I'm not already broke," I muttered while helping stack towels behind the desk. Shane snorted from nearby. "You complain like an old man. I have the soul of one. You have the posture of one too. Wow." He grinned without looking up from the cleaning spray bottle in his hand. The gym emptied out quicker than usual after closing. Rain hammered against the front windows hard enough to blur the parking lot lights outside. "Storm's getting worse," I said. "Yeah." I grabbed my backpack. "Guess I should head before the roads flood." Shane glanced at me immediately. "You're not biking in that." "I've biked in worse." "You literally haven't." "True, but…" "Lucas." There it was again. That tone. Calm. Firm. Impossible to argue with. So 20 minutes later we were sitting in his truck, windshield wipers working overtime while thunder rattled somewhere above us. Traffic barely moved. "This might actually be the apocalypse," I muttered. If we die tonight, I need you to know I lied earlier." "About what?" "I actually have 5 forks." Shane laughed loudly enough that it startled me. Real laughter. Head tipping back slightly, hand tightening on the steering wheel. And for some reason, seeing him relax like that did something weird to my chest. The storm got bad enough that visibility practically disappeared. Shane leaned forward slightly, squinting through the windshield. "Yeah, okay. I'm not driving through this." "What?" He pulled into the empty parking lot of a closed coffee shop. "We're waiting it out." I looked around. Rain slammed against the truck roof so hard it sounded almost violent. "Honestly," I admitted. "Good call." The inside of the truck felt strangely small suddenly. Warm. Quiet except for the storm. Shane leaned back in his seat with a tired sigh. "Long week." "Yeah? You ever gonna tell me why you always look stressed after checking your phone?" His head turned toward me immediately. I hadn't meant to say that out loud. "You notice that?" he asked carefully. "You notice everything," I replied before thinking. That made something shift in his expression. Not dramatic. Just softer. Outside, thunder cracked somewhere close enough to make me jump slightly. Shane smiled faintly. "You scared of storms?" "No." Another thunderclap. "Maybe a little." "Good to know." "Oh, shut up." He laughed quietly again, then settled deeper into his seat. For a minute neither of us spoke. Then, unexpectedly, he said, "My ex used to hate storms too." I went still. Not because of the ex part. Because of the he. Shane didn't seem to notice my reaction immediately. His eyes stayed on the rain running down the windshield. "He'd make me drive around during thunderstorms because he said sitting still made it worse." Shane continued softly. "Said movement distracted him." My heartbeat suddenly felt way too loud. I tried to sound normal when I asked, "You guys together long?" Shane was quiet for a second. "Almost 3 years." 3 years. Something warm and nervous twisted low in my stomach. Must have been serious, I said carefully. Yeah, he replied. It was. The truck filled with silence again, but this one felt different. Not awkward. Just aware. Like suddenly we were standing much closer to something real than before. Finally Shane glanced over at me. You got really quiet. I shrugged, trying to play it off casually. Just listening. His eyes stayed on mine for a second too long. Then he smiled slightly. And somehow that tiny expression changed the entire atmosphere inside the truck. Like both of us understood something now that hadn't been spoken aloud before. After that night in the storm, things between me and Shane changed in a way either of us acknowledged directly. But I felt it immediately. The drives home got quieter at first. Not uncomfortable quiet. Careful quiet. Like we were both suddenly aware of how easy it would be to say the wrong thing now that the door had been cracked open. Or maybe the right thing. A few days later, I was wiping down treadmills near closing when Shane walked over holding 2 protein bars. He tossed one at me. I caught it automatically. What's this? You've eaten vending machine chips for dinner 3 nights in a row. You're stalking me. I'm observant. I looked at the protein bar packaging suspiciously. This tastes healthy, doesn't it? You say that like it's an insult. It is an insult. That got the small smile again. God, I was starting to live for those smiles. The problem with Shane was that once I knew he liked men or had, at least my brain refused to act normal about him anymore. Every glance suddenly felt loaded. Every accidental touch lingered too long in my head afterward. And Shane touched a lot, actually. Casual things I probably shouldn't have noticed so much. A hand briefly against my shoulder squeezing past me behind the desk. His fingers brushing mine when he handed me my coffee. One night fixing the hood of my sweatshirt absent-mindedly because apparently it was folded weird. None of it meant anything. Except it kind of did. At least to me. The gym manager, Denise, noticed before anybody else. She cornered me near the front desk one evening while Shane trained a client across the room. You and Tattoo Boy dating yet? She asked casually. I nearly dropped the clipboard in my hand. What? She didn't even look up from her computer. So that's a no. We're friends. We are. Denise finally looked at me then with the expression of someone watching a very predictable movie. Lucas, she said, that man looks like you personally invented quiet evenings. I stared at her. That is the weirdest sentence anyone's ever said to me. But accurate. I immediately turned toward Shane across the gym. Bad idea. Because the second I looked over, he looked up too. Like he'd felt it somehow. Our eyes locked for maybe 2 seconds before I forced myself to look away again. Denise made a soft humming noise beside me. Oh my God! I muttered. That night during the drive home, I became painfully aware of every inch of space inside the truck. Shane noticed something was off almost immediately. You're quiet tonight. Am I? Maybe I'm evolving. Into what? Someone mysterious. That's unfortunate. I liked you better as a disaster. I laughed despite myself. Shane glanced over briefly, smiling faintly, then focused back on the road. You okay though? There was something dangerous about the way he asked things sometimes. Calm enough to feel safe. Direct enough that it made lying difficult. Yeah, I said carefully. Just tired. He nodded slowly like he knew I wasn't telling the full truth but wasn't going to push. That should have relieved me. Instead it made me want to tell him everything. Which was a terrible idea. Because somewhere between late-night drives and shared dinners from drive-through bags and conversations in parked cars, I'd developed an actual problem. I liked him. Not casually. Not safely. I liked him in the embarrassing, consuming way where small things started mattering too much. The sound of his laugh from across the gym. The way he rolled up the sleeves of his hoodies absent-mindedly. How gentle his voice became whenever he talked about people he cared about. And worst of all, I couldn't tell if he felt it too or if I was just building castles out of basic human kindness. The answer came accidentally. About a week later, Shane invited me over. Not formally. It happened after a brutal closing shift where half the gym's power briefly went out, and one guy somehow got stuck inside the leg press machine. By the time we locked up, both of us looked exhausted. You eaten? Shane asked while we walked through the parking lot. Emotionally? No. He snorted. Physically? Also no. He unlocked his truck. Come over. I've got food. I should have said no. Mostly because my brain immediately interpreted, come over, as way more meaningful than it probably was. But I was tired and hungry and hopelessly gone for this man already, so instead I said, okay. Shane's apartment surprised me. Not because it was fancy, it wasn't. But because it felt so him. Quiet. Clean without looking sterile. Warm lighting. Books stacked unevenly on shelves beside dumbbells and resistance bands. A huge gray couch that looked aggressively comfortable. You actually live like an adult, I said while looking around. Terrifying, right? There's framed art. You say that like I committed a crime. I kind of assumed you slept on a mattress directly on the floor. That's just insulting. I smiled despite myself. Shane disappeared into the kitchen while I hovered awkwardly near the couch, trying not to overthink the fact that I was inside his apartment at almost midnight. You want pasta or are you emotionally committed to cereal? He called. Wow. Judgmental. That's not an answer. Pasta. Good choice. I wandered toward the kitchen doorway carefully. And that's when I noticed the photo on the fridge. Shane with another guy. Dark hair. Nice smile. Arms around each other casually. The X. Something strange tightened in my chest before I could stop it. Shane noticed where I was looking almost immediately. Oh, he said quietly. I looked away fast. Sorry. Wasn't snooping. You're fine. But the energy shifted slightly anyway. Shane stared at the pasta water for a second before speaking again. That picture's old. Okay. We broke up almost a year ago. I nodded carefully, unsure what the correct response was. Finally, he glanced over at me. He cheated, Shane said simply. The bluntness caught me off guard. Oh. Yeah. There wasn't anger in his voice anymore. Just tiredness. He kept apologizing after. Shane continued softly. Wanted another chance. Said it didn't mean anything. I leaned against the counter quietly listening. But once somebody makes you feel stupid for trusting them, he said, it changes things. Something about the way he admitted that made him suddenly feel more vulnerable than I'd ever seen him before. Not gym trainer Shane. Not calm, collected Shane. Just a guy who'd gotten hurt. I'm sorry, I said quietly. He shrugged once. Was a while ago. But it clearly still mattered. The kitchen fell quiet except for boiling water. Then unexpectedly, Shane asked, You ever been in love? The question hit me so fast I almost laughed from nerves. That bad, huh? No, I rubbed the back of my neck awkwardly. Not really. He looked surprised. Seriously? Seriously. How? I don't know, I admitted. Guess nobody's ruined my life enough yet. That got a real laugh out of him. You want that to happen eventually? What? The ruining my life part? The love part. I looked at him then. Really looked at him. And suddenly the kitchen felt too warm. Yeah, I admitted softly. I think so. Shane held my gaze for one dangerous second too long before turning back toward the stove again. Neither of us spoke after that. But the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full of things we were both trying very hard not to say. After that night at Shane's apartment, I became deeply, painfully aware of him all the time. Not just when we were alone. Everywhere. At work, I'd catch myself tracking him across the gym without meaning to. The sound of his voice carried differently now. I noticed how patient he was with nervous new clients, How he always cleaned equipment even when nobody asked him to. How exhausted he looked after long shifts when he thought nobody was paying attention. And worst of all, he started noticing me noticing him. I realized it during a Tuesday evening shift. The gym was busy enough that we barely talked for almost 2 hours. I was stuck checking in members while Shane trained some finance guy who kept calling squats leg dips. At one point, Shane glanced toward the desk while explaining something to his client. Our eyes met instantly. Like they'd been looking for each other automatically. He looked away first this time. That should not have affected me as much as it did. "You're smiling at the computer," Denise said beside me suddenly. I nearly jumped. Jesus Christ. You two are exhausting. We're literally standing separately. I refused to continue this conversation on principle. Unfortunately, Denise was becoming more correct by the day. A few nights later, Shane drove me home after another closing shift. The city was quiet, streets mostly empty except for scattered headlights reflecting against wet pavement. Music played softly through the truck speakers, low enough that neither of us was really listening to it. "You off tomorrow?" Shane asked. "Yeah. You got plans?" I shrugged. "Probably laundry. Maybe stare at the wall for recreation. Huge day. I know how to have fun." He smiled faintly, fingers tapping once against the steering wheel. Then, casually, "You could come over again." My heartbeat immediately betrayed me. I tried to sound normal. "For pasta?" "Sure." That sounded suspiciously hesitant. "I mean," Shane said carefully, eyes still on the road, "it doesn't have to just be for pasta." Oh, that was absolutely not a friend sentence. The truck suddenly felt about 6 degrees warmer. I stared out the passenger window mostly because looking at him felt dangerous now. "You flirting with me?" I asked before my brain could stop me. Silence. Then Shane laughed softly under his breath. "Little bit." That single sentence completely destroyed whatever emotional stability I had left. I looked over at him finally. He wasn't smirking. Wasn't joking. Just watching the road with that calm expression that somehow made everything he said feel more serious. "You're very casual about dropping that information," I managed. "I've been trying not to for like 2 months." "What?" That finally made him glance at me. "You think I drive 20 extra minutes every night because I'm passionate about civic transportation?" I stared at him. The truck stopped at a red light. Shane looked over fully this time, one arm resting loosely against the steering wheel. "You're not exactly subtle either, Lucas." My entire body felt warm suddenly. "This feels fake," I muttered. "Why?" "Because stuff like this doesn't happen to me." His expression softened immediately at that. "It's happening, though." The light turned green. Neither of us spoke for the rest of the drive home. Mostly because I genuinely thought my heart might explode if the conversation continued. When we pulled up outside my apartment, I reached for the door handle automatically. Then stopped. Shane was looking at me. Not intensely. Not dramatically. Just openly. Like he was waiting to see what I'd do. And suddenly I understood that this moment mattered. Not because something huge was happening. Because something could. "You want to come up?" I asked quietly. Shane's eyes flicked over my face once. "Yeah," he said softly. "I do." My apartment had never felt smaller. Or messier. Or more humiliatingly full of cereal boxes. Shane noticed immediately too. "You really weren't joking," he said while looking into my kitchen cabinets. "I'm suddenly feeling very attacked. There's 7 boxes. One is basically empty. That doesn't help your case." I laughed nervously while tossing my keys onto the counter. The energy between us felt completely different now that everything had been acknowledged out loud. No more pretending. No more wondering. Which somehow made every little thing feel bigger. Shane leaned against the kitchen counter watching me quietly. "You nervous?" he asked. "Extremely." That got another soft smile out of him. "Why?" Because I've liked you for so long that this feels medically concerning. He laughed under his breath, head lowering briefly. Then he looked back at me. I was trying really hard not to like you at first. That surprised me enough to cut through my nerves slightly. Why? Because you worked with me. Very responsible. And because you looked at me like I was better than I am. The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. I frowned slightly. I don't think that. You don't know me that well yet. I know enough. Shane went quiet after that. Not distant. Just thoughtful. Then he pushed himself off the counter slowly. And walked closer. Every nerve in my body immediately became hyper-aware. You know, he said softly, stopping right in front of me. I've been thinking about kissing you since that storm. I think my brain fully stopped functioning for a second. Only since the storm? I asked weakly. He smiled. Okay, he admitted. Before that too. My apartment suddenly felt incredibly quiet. Shane was close enough now that I could see tiny details I'd never noticed before. A faint scar near his jaw. The tiredness under his eyes from long shifts. The way his expression softened every time he looked directly at me. You can tell me to slow down, he said quietly. Instead, I asked, are you always this calm? No, he admitted. Just trying not to scare you off. That ship sailed a while ago. Something warm flickered across his face at that. Then slowly, carefully, he reached for my hand. Just my hand. His fingers slid against mine gently, like he was giving me every chance to pull away if I wanted to. I didn't. The contact felt strangely grounding. Real. Shane looked down briefly at our hands together before meeting my eyes again. There you are, he murmured softly. The sentence hit me right in the chest. What does that mean? I whispered. He shook his head slightly like he wasn't even fully aware he'd said it out loud. But he didn't let go of my hand either. And neither did I. Shane kissed me like he was trying very hard not to rush. That's what I remember most. Not fireworks. Not some dramatic movie moment. Just warmth. Carefulness. The feeling of someone choosing to move slowly because they understood exactly how much the moment mattered. His hand stayed wrapped around mine the entire time. And honestly, that somehow affected me more than the kiss itself. When he pulled back slightly, my brain still hadn't fully caught up. You okay? He asked softly. I stared at him for a second. I think my soul just left my body a little. That made him laugh quietly, forehead dropping briefly against mine. Good, he murmured. That sounded evil. Maybe a little. I could feel how nervous he actually was underneath the calmness now. The slight tension in his shoulders. The way his thumb kept moving absently against my hand like he needed grounding too. Which weirdly helped. Because if Shane the composed, impossible to read Shane was nervous too, maybe I wasn't completely losing my mind. You know, I said carefully, you hide panic surprisingly well. He looked genuinely confused. Panic? You're telling me you're not freaking out right now? Oh, I absolutely am. That startled a laugh out of me. Shane smiled at the sound immediately, like he couldn't help it. I just have more practice pretending I'm calm, he admitted. Why? He hesitated slightly. Then, because most people expect me to be. That answer stayed with me. There was something lonely hidden inside it. Before I could think too hard about that, Shane glanced around my apartment again. So, he said lightly, is this the part where you offer me something to drink? I have tap water and emotional issues. Perfect. My favorites. I laughed, and finally stepped away toward the kitchen mostly because I needed a second to breathe normally again. Shane followed slower, leaning casually against the counter while I grabbed 2 glasses. The atmosphere had changed completely now. Softer somehow. More open. Like we'd crossed some invisible line and neither of us wanted to step back over it. You know what's weird? I admitted while filling the glasses. I thought once this happened, everything would suddenly feel less tense. And it's worse. Shane grinned slightly. Yeah. That part sticks around for a bit. You seem suspiciously experienced. I've kissed people before, Lucas. Okay, rude. Don't bring facts into this. He laughed again. God. I was becoming addicted to making him laugh. The conversation drifted after that. Easier now somehow. We talked about stupid things at first because neither of us seemed fully ready to address the obvious. Bad gym playlists. Terrible clients. The fact that Denise absolutely knew something was happening before we did. She called you tattoo boy to my face, I admitted. Shane looked horrified. Absolutely not. She said you look at me like I invented quiet evenings. That actually made him freeze for a second. Then, that's weirdly specific. So you admit it? His eyes flicked toward mine carefully. I mean, he said softly, she's not completely wrong. That hit embarrassingly hard. I looked down at my glass mostly because I suddenly forgot how to act like a person again. Shane noticed immediately. You do that every time. What? Look away when somebody says something honest to you. I frowned slightly. No, I don't. You literally just did. Well, now I'm doing it out of spite. He smiled softly. Then, after a quiet second, you really don't see what people see in you, huh? The question caught me off guard enough that I looked back up automatically. What's that supposed to mean? Shane shrugged lightly, but his expression stayed serious. You act like caring about you is surprising. Nobody had ever said something like that to me before. At least not so directly. I tried joking my way out of the sudden tightness in my chest. Well, I muttered, my personality is mostly built out of anxiety and cereal. Lucas. The way he said my name made me stop talking instantly. Not sharp. Not frustrated. Just firm in that gentle way he had sometimes. You're allowed to let people like you, he said quietly. The apartment went very still. Because suddenly this conversation wasn't really about flirting anymore. It was about me. About the parts of myself I usually kept hidden under jokes. And somehow Shane kept seeing straight through them anyway. I swallowed hard and looked down at my hands. That's harder than it sounds. I know. You do? Shane leaned back against the counter slightly, eyes lowering for a second. My ex-cheating messed me up more than I usually admit, he said quietly. Not because he left. Because afterward I kept wondering what was wrong with me that made it so easy. Something in my chest twisted painfully at the honesty in his voice. But eventually, he continued softly, I realized somebody hurting you usually says more about them than you. I looked at him carefully. You actually believe that? Some days better than others. That felt real enough that I believed him. Silence settled again. But this time it wasn't nervous silence. It felt closer. Like every honest thing we admitted pulled us slightly nearer to each other without either of us trying. Shane glanced toward the clock eventually, and sighed quietly. It's late. The disappointment I felt was immediate, and probably visible too because his expression softened again. I should go, he added. Yeah. Neither of us moved. Then Shane smiled slightly like he noticed that too. You gonna make this difficult for me? Probably. Cool. He stepped closer again slowly. And this time when he kissed me, it felt different. Less tentative. Still careful. Still warm. But more certain now. Like both of us understood this wasn't just almost becoming something anymore. It already was. The next shift we worked together was unbearable. Not bad unbearable. Worse. The kind where every normal interaction suddenly feels charged because now you know exactly what's sitting underneath it. I walked into the gym already hyper-aware of Shane before I even saw him. And the second I did see him, it got dramatically worse. He was near the free weights helping a client, sleeves pushed up, focused expression in place. Completely normal. Completely professional. Then he looked up. And smiled at me automatically. Not big. Not obvious. But different enough that my stomach flipped instantly. Oh no! Denise muttered beside me from the front desk. I blinked. What? You two kissed? I nearly choked on air. Excuse me? Please never say that sentence to me again. So I'm right. I refused to answer on legal grounds. Unfortunately, my face apparently answered for me. Denise looked delighted. Finally. Jesus Christ. Can you act normal about this? No. Then she walked away humming to herself while I contemplated quitting my job and changing my identity. The worst part was Shane clearly knew something had happened. Not because Denise said anything. Because he kept catching my eye from across the gym and looking like he was trying not to smile. Which honestly felt unfair. Around halfway through the shift, he walked over to the desk holding his water bottle. You good? He asked casually. No. His mouth twitched immediately. Why not? Because apparently Denise has developed psychic abilities. That got a quiet laugh out of him. She say something? She said, and I quote, you two kissed. Shane actually looked impressed. Damn. You're enjoying this way too much. A little bit. I glared at him weakly. He leaned one arm against the desk slightly closer than necessary. You regret it? He asked quietly. The sudden seriousness in his voice caught me off guard. I looked up at him immediately. No, I said honestly. Something relaxed in his face right away. Good, he murmured. Then, before I could recover emotionally from that expression, one of his clients called his name from across the room. Shane straightened again reluctantly. Closing shift tonight? He asked. I'll wait for you. That sentence stayed in my head for the next 4 hours. I'll wait for you. Nobody had ever really said things like that to me before. Not casually. Not like it was obvious. By the time we locked up that night, I felt restless in a way I couldn't fully explain. Shane noticed immediately once we got into the truck. You've been in your head all evening. I stared out the window. Sorry. Don't apologize. Easy for him to say. He looked calm. Grounded. Meanwhile, I felt like every emotion inside me was trying to happen simultaneously. You ever feel? I started slowly. Like something's going too well and your brain starts preparing for disaster automatically? Shane was quiet for a second. Yeah, he admitted softly. All the time. I looked over at him, slightly surprised by how quickly he answered. He kept his eyes on the road. My dad used to call it waiting for the other shoe to drop, he said. Like if you get too comfortable, life notices. That's exactly it. The truck fell quiet again. Then unexpectedly Shane reached over and rested his hand briefly against my knee. Just for a second. Grounding. I'm not planning on disappearing, he said quietly. The honesty in his voice hit somewhere deep in my chest. Because that was the fear underneath everything else, wasn't it? Not just rejection. Loss. The possibility that this would become important to me and then vanish. You barely know me, I admitted softly. Shane smiled faintly. Lucas, I've spent 2 months driving you home while you tell me stories about customers you hate and argue passionately about breakfast cereal. That's fair. I know you. The way he said it made me believe him a little. When we reached my apartment this time, either of us moved to get out immediately. Rain tapped softly against the windshield again, not storming like before. Just steady. Shane leaned back slightly in his seat, watching me carefully. What? I asked nervously. You're doing the thing again. What thing? Thinking yourself into panic. Rude part was he wasn't wrong. I exhaled slowly and dropped my head back against the seat. Sorry. I'm not good at this. At what? This. I gestured vaguely between us. Somebody actually liking me. Shane went very still after that. Then quietly. Who made you feel hard to like? The question hit harder than I expected. Because there wasn't one dramatic answer. Just years of small things. People leaving. Friends fading. Being too much for some people and not enough for others. I shrugged carefully. Nobody specifically. Shane looked at me for a long moment like he didn't fully believe that. Then he said something that completely undid me. Well, they were wrong. Simple sentence. Quietly said. But something in my chest cracked wide open anyway. I looked away immediately because suddenly my eyes burned embarrassingly bad. Hey, Shane said softly. I'm fine. You're absolutely not. I laughed weakly despite myself. Shane reached over carefully, then not rushing, and tilted my chin slightly back toward him. You don't have to act okay every second around me, he said quietly. That did it. Not dramatic crying. Nothing huge. Just this awful, overwhelming feeling of being seen too clearly by someone I desperately wanted to keep seeing me anyway. Shane's expression softened instantly. Come here, he murmured. And when he pulled me into a hug, it felt so natural that somehow that made it worse. Because my body reacted like it already knew him. Trusted him. I pressed my face briefly against his shoulder, laughing once under my breath, mostly out of embarrassment. This is humiliating. No, Shane said softly. It's human. We stayed like that for a minute. Truck quiet around us. Rain outside. His hand moving slowly against my back in a way that felt calming without trying too hard. Then eventually I pulled back slightly. Shane looked at me carefully. Better? A little. Good. Neither of us moved far away though. And after a quiet second, Shane smiled faintly and said, You know, for someone who claimed he wasn't good at this, you're doing okay. I stared at him. Then laughed softly despite everything. And somewhere in the middle of that moment, sitting in his parked truck with rain outside and his hand still warm against mine, I realized something terrifying. I was already falling in love with him. Falling in love with Shane was not dramatic at first. That's the dangerous thing about it. It happened quietly. In pieces. The way he always remembered what energy drink I liked and grabbed one for me before shifts. How he texted me after I got home even if he just dropped me off 10 minutes earlier. You alive? Barely. Good. Would have been inconvenient if you died. Very romantic. I'm trying my best here. Little things. But eventually enough little things become something huge. About a week after the rainstorm conversation in his truck, Shane started staying longer at my apartment after drives home. Not overnight. Just longer. We'd sit on my couch watching terrible reality shows while arguing about contestants like our opinions mattered. You're defending him because he's attractive, I accused one night. No, Shane replied calmly. I'm defending him because everyone else on this show is deeply annoying. You literally called him beautiful 10 minutes ago. He is beautiful. I stared at him. Shane looked back at me innocently for approximately half a second before laughing. You're easy to mess with, he admitted. That was evil. A little. The ease between us started becoming my favorite part. Not just the flirting. Not just the tension. The comfort. Like somehow Shane had slipped into my life so naturally that I couldn't remember what evenings felt like before him anymore. And apparently other people noticed too. One afternoon Ethan stopped by the gym while I was working. He took one look at me talking to Shane near the desk and immediately narrowed his eyes. Oh my God! I frowned. What? You're glowing. I absolutely am not. You look like somebody in a coming-of-age movie. That is incredibly specific. Ethan glanced toward Shane, who was helping restack towels nearby. Then back at me. That man likes you an upsetting amount. My heartbeat reacted instantly despite how obvious that should have been by now. We're just figuring stuff out, I muttered. Ethan stared at me for a second. Then, Lucas. What? You just said figuring stuff out instead of immediately panicking and denying everything. I paused. Oh. That was new. The truth was, Shane made things feel strangely safe. Not uncomplicated. Definitely not emotionally safe in the sense that I wasn't constantly thinking about him. But safe to feel. Safe to want things. One night after closing, we stopped at a diner before he drove me home. It was nearly empty except for an exhausted waitress and two college students arguing quietly in a corner booth. Shane sat across from me wearing a dark hoodie with his sleeves pushed up, absently stirring coffee he barely drank. "You tired?" I asked. You've looked exhausted all week." He shrugged lightly. "Busy." But something about the answer felt incomplete. I studied him carefully across the table. "You okay?" That got his attention immediately. "What do you mean?" "I mean you do this thing when something's bothering you." "What thing?" "You go quieter." Shane stared at me for a second, then smiled faintly. "That's annoying. I'm observant." Apparently. But he still looked tired. Finally he sighed softly and leaned back against the booth. "My mom called earlier." "That bad, huh?" He laughed quietly through his nose. "You ever have family members who somehow make you feel 17 again no matter how old you get?" "All of them. She keeps asking why I never bring anybody around anymore." The sentence settled carefully between us. I looked down briefly at my coffee cup. "You don't have to tell her about me," I said quietly. Shane's expression changed immediately. "Lucas, I mean it. I know this is still new and I'm not hiding you." The certainty in his voice caught me off guard. Shane leaned forward slightly, eyes steady on mine now. "I haven't figured out what this is becoming yet," he admitted softly. "But I know I'm not ashamed of it." Something warm spread painfully through my chest. Because he said it so simply. Like it was obvious. I looked down again mostly because eye contact suddenly felt dangerous. Shane noticed. He always noticed. "You really expect people to leave eventually, huh?" he asked quietly. The question hit close enough to make me uncomfortable immediately. "I don't know." "Yes, you do." I picked at the edge of a napkin awkwardly. Shane's voice softened slightly. "Hey." I glanced back up reluctantly. "You know what I think?" he said. "What?" "I think you've gotten so used to people making affection feel temporary that you don't know what to do when it isn't." The silence after that felt enormous. Because he was right. Painfully right. Before I could answer, the waitress dropped off our food with the exhausted expression of somebody nearing the end of a double shift. "Anything else?" she asked. "No thanks," Shane replied politely. Then after she walked away, he looked back at me. "I scare you a little, don't I?" I laughed nervously. "A lot, actually." "Why?" "Because you feel important already." Shane went completely still. I immediately regretted saying it out loud. "Sorry," I muttered quickly. "That sounded intense." "No," he said softly. "It sounded honest." The diner suddenly felt too warm again. Shane looked at me for a long, quiet second before smiling slightly to himself. "What?" I asked suspiciously. "You know," he said, "I was planning to take this slow." "That sounds threatening. But then you keep saying things like that." I groaned immediately, and covered my face with one hand. "Can we pretend I'm cooler than this?" "Absolutely not." "Shane!" He laughed softly again. Then, after a quiet second, his expression gentled in that dangerous way that always made my chest tighten. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "you feel important to me too." I swear my heart actually stopped for a second. The terrifying part? I believed him completely. Things with Shane stopped feeling temporary after that diner conversation. Not officially. We still hadn't labeled whatever we were becoming. Neither of us had done the boyfriend conversation yet. But something shifted anyway. The uncertainty faded. Not completely. Just enough. Shane started showing up differently after that. More openly. He'd lean against the front desk while I worked just to talk between clients. Started bringing me coffee without pretending it was accidental. One morning I walked into the gym and found a blueberry muffin sitting beside the computer with a sticky note that said, "Eat actual food for once." No name. No signature. Didn't need one. Denise saw me smiling at it and looked deeply exhausted immediately. "You two are disgusting." We haven't even done anything. You're emotionally flirting at industrial levels. I laughed despite myself and tucked the note into my pocket anyway. The worst part was how easy happiness started becoming around him. Which honestly terrified me a little. Because once you let yourself get comfortable, you have something to lose. That fear followed me quietly for days. Not because Shane gave me reasons to doubt him. Because he didn't. If anything, he was too consistent. Too gentle. Too steady. And people like that felt dangerous in a completely different way. One Friday night after closing, Shane invited me back to his apartment again. This time it didn't feel nerve-wracking walking inside. It felt familiar. My shoes by his door. His hoodie tossed over the couch. The sound of him moving around the kitchen while I looked through his ridiculous tea collection. You own 17 kinds of tea, I called. I contain multitudes. You contain old man energy. That too. I smiled to myself while opening random cabinets, mostly because I liked how natural being here felt now. Like my body had already decided this place was safe before my brain caught up. Shane walked back into the living room holding 2 bowls of pasta. You snooping? He asked. I'm learning your secrets. Dangerous hobby. I took the bowl from him carefully. Our fingers brushed briefly. Still affected me every single time. We settled onto the couch with some random movie playing mostly as background noise. About halfway through, Shane stretched one arm across the back of the couch behind me casually. The movement was small, but intimate enough that my heartbeat noticeably changed pace anyway. I tried focusing on the movie. Failed completely. You're thinking too loud again, Shane murmured. I hate that you can tell. He smiled slightly without looking away from the TV. You get this crease between your eyebrows. Oh good. Love that for me. It's cute. I looked over at him immediately. Shane met my eyes calmly, like saying things like that didn't affect him at all. Which was unfair because they absolutely affected me. You can't just say stuff like that casually, I muttered. Why not? Because then I malfunction. That got a quiet laugh out of him. Then after a second, his expression softened slightly. You know what I like about you most? He asked. I stared at him suspiciously. That sounds dangerous already. You feel everything honestly. The answer caught me off guard enough that I went quiet immediately. Shane continued before I could deflect. You care honestly. Laugh honestly. Panic honestly. His mouth twitched faintly. You don't know how to be halfway invested in anything. Nobody had ever described me like that before. At least not like it was something good. I looked down at my bowl quietly. My ex used to say I was too sensitive, I admitted before thinking better of it. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Shane's expression tightened slightly, not angry. Just focused. He was wrong. I shrugged awkwardly. Maybe. No. Shane set his bowl down on the coffee table. Lucas, feeling things deeply isn't a flaw. It becomes one when people get tired of it. Something moved across his face at that. Not pity. Something sadder. He turned toward me more fully now. Who taught you that loving you takes too much effort? The question landed hard enough to make my chest ache unexpectedly. Because again, there wasn't one answer. Just accumulated years of feeling slightly out of place in people's lives. Like I always cared a little harder than they did. I laughed quietly to break the tension. You really like emotionally cornering me, huh? Only because you dodge everything with jokes. That's my personality. No, Shane said softly. That's your defense mechanism. The room went very still after that. Because he was right again. And honestly, I was getting tired of being seen so clearly by him. Not because I hated it. Because I liked it too much. Shane looked at me carefully for a second longer. Then quieter. You know I'm not asking for perfect, right? I frowned slightly. What? You act like you have to become easier to love before somebody stays. My throat tightened immediately. Shane reached over slowly then, fingers brushing lightly against mine where my hand rested on the couch. You don't, he said softly. That almost ruined me right there. Because he said it so simply. Like it was obvious. Like he couldn't understand why I'd ever believe otherwise. I swallowed hard and looked away before he could fully see how much the words affected me. Unfortunately, Shane just moved closer instead. Hey. You're doing it again. What? Trying not to be affected. I laughed weakly under my breath. I'm failing pretty badly. His shoulder pressed lightly against mine now. Warm. Steady. I like you exactly like this, Shane murmured quietly. The honesty in his voice hit me straight in the chest. And before I could overthink myself out of it, I turned toward him. Shane kissed me immediately this time. Like he'd already been thinking about it too. Slow at first. Familiar now. His hand sliding gently against my jaw while the movie played Forgotten somewhere in the background. And for the first time in a very long time, I stopped waiting for something to go wrong. Just for a minute. I let myself be happy instead. A few days later, Shane introduced me to his mom. Accidentally? At least I think it was accidentally. We were sitting in his apartment on a Sunday afternoon, while he meal prepped chicken and rice like a deeply committed gym stereotype. I was helping, which mostly meant stealing pieces of bell pepper and criticizing his music choices. This playlist sounds like an expensive candle store. You're uncultured. You listen to songs where women whisper emotionally over piano. And, before I could continue insulting him properly, his phone rang on the counter. Shane glanced at the screen. Then sighed immediately. Your mom? I guessed. How'd you know? You just developed the expression of a tired father of three. Accurate. He answered anyway, balancing the phone between his shoulder and ear while stirring something on the stove. Hey, Mom. I tried very hard to focus on the peppers and not eavesdrop. Failed instantly. No, I ate already. Pause. Yes, vegetables count. Longer pause. I heard a woman's voice faintly through the speaker saying something too muffled to understand. Then Shane glanced toward me automatically before looking away again. My stomach immediately flipped. No, he said carefully. I'm not alone. Oh no. I looked down at the cutting board so fast I almost gave myself whiplash. Another muffled question. Shane rubbed one hand down his face. Mom. I could literally hear the smile in her voice even through the phone speaker. And suddenly Shane was laughing quietly under his breath. Fine, he muttered. Then he looked directly at me. Lucas, he said carefully, my mom wants to know if you exist or if I invented you. I stared at him in horror. You told her about me? She asked why I'd been smiling at my phone like an idiot for 3 weeks. That is deeply upsetting information. Shane grinned despite himself. Then before I could panic properly, he held the phone slightly toward me. You don't have to talk to her, he said quickly. She's just nosy. From the speaker came. I heard that, Shane. I laughed helplessly before I could stop myself. And apparently that was enough because suddenly his mom gasped dramatically. Oh, he's real. I buried my face in my hands immediately while Shane laughed louder. This is humiliating. You're doing great, Shane said, visibly entertained. Eventually, against my better judgment, I took the phone. Hi, I said nervously. Lucas, his mom replied warmly. Thank God. I was starting to think my son joined a cult or something. I choked on a laugh. Behind me, Shane looked deeply offended. Why is that your first assumption? You bought indoor plants voluntarily last month. That proves nothing. His mom ignored him completely. You work with him, right? Yeah. How are you surviving? Okay, well, Shane muttered. I smiled helplessly into the phone. And somehow, within 5 minutes, his mom had already asked if I was eating enough and warned me that Shane overcooks chicken when he's stressed. Mom. I'm helping. By the time the call ended, my face hurt from laughing. Shane tossed his phone onto the counter dramatically. Traitor. I like her. Everyone likes her. That's the problem. I watched him for a second after that. The relaxed way he moved around the kitchen. The fact that he'd let me into this part of his life without hesitation. How natural it suddenly felt standing here with him on a lazy Sunday afternoon. Something warm settled painfully deep in my chest. Shane noticed me staring almost immediately. What? I shook my head slightly. Nothing. Liar. I smiled faintly and leaned back against the counter. It's just weird. What is? You. His eyebrows lifted slightly. That sounds concerning. No, I mean. I laughed softly at myself. You're just really easy to picture in my life. The sentence slipped out before I could stop it. Silence followed instantly. I looked down at the floor, horrified with myself. Cool. Casual thing to say. But Shane wasn't laughing. When I glanced back up, he was watching me with that soft, impossible expression that always made my chest feel too tight. You know what's weird? He asked quietly. What? I was thinking the exact same thing this morning. That completely stole the air from my lungs. Shane stepped closer slowly, dish towel still hanging loosely over one shoulder. This scares me too, by the way, he admitted softly. You hide it better. Only externally. I smiled weakly. Then after a second, Shane reached out and lightly caught one of my belt loops, pulling me just a little closer toward him. Not dramatic. Just enough. I'm trying really hard not to rush you, he murmured. My heartbeat immediately betrayed me. You're not rushing me. His eyes searched mine carefully for a second like he was making sure I meant it. Then he smiled faintly. Good. And suddenly I realized something. At some point without noticing, this had stopped feeling fragile. Not because nothing could go wrong. Because Shane kept choosing me in small, steady ways over and over again. The rides home. The late-night conversations. The honesty. The way he looked at me like my feelings weren't inconvenient. Nobody had ever loved me carefully before. And maybe that's why it felt so overwhelming now. Later that night, after dinner and another terrible movie either of us paid attention to, Shane walked me downstairs to his truck even though I was literally staying over. You know, I said while laughing softly, this is objectively unnecessary. Then why are you doing it? Shane opened the passenger door dramatically for me. Because, he said, I'm committed to the bit. I rolled my eyes affectionately and climbed inside. But once he got into the driver's seat too, neither of us reached for the keys. The parking lot sat quiet around us. Warm yellow streetlights. Summer air drifting through the cracked windows. Shane looked over at me after a minute. You happy? He asked softly. The question caught me off guard in the gentlest way possible. Because the answer came immediately. Yeah, I admitted quietly. I really am. His expression softened instantly. Good, he murmured. Then he reached over and intertwined our fingers together across the center console like it was the most natural thing in the world. And this time? It finally felt natural to me too.